Okay, wow. Whew. This took longer than expected. Note to self, I work surprisingly slow. Although the new medication is making life less painful and therefore easier to work, so that is a win. Anyway, who wants to see some Drag Race X Pokemon gym leaders? Anyone? I figured this was probably a pretty seamless way to start incorporating other franchises I enjoy into this channel, and it was video 2 that you guys initially voted for, so here we are. Again, I'm trying something new here, and I'm just not going to know if you guys like it or not unless you give me some feedback, so please leave a comment letting me know what you think, and if you can't think of what to comment, tell me what drag queens you want to see next. Today we'll be giving the Pokeverse makeover to Rupaul, Jinx Monsoon, and Plastique Tiara. So, starting with Rupaul. Before we get to the actual designing, we need to figure out what type of gym leader she is and where she's from, because the designs for the Kanto gym leaders are obviously very different from the Paldea ones. I figured she's from Kanto because she's also the OG and a dragon trainer because of the pseudo-legendary, or legendary depending on what groups you're hanging with, status she holds. I figure she's such an opportunist she'd probably take over Giovanni's gym because he's not exactly consistent with his work ethic as a gym leader. Her base pose was easy to figure out. I obviously needed the May the Best Drag Queen win pose. I decided to do 3 rough concepts per queen and then choose one to go ahead because honestly, I do not think I'm practiced enough at this concept design stuff to be just diving headfirst in and sticking with the first design, and drawing up RuPaul's designs proves me right in that. I tried to cover every kind of iconic RuPaul outfit and hairstyle in these sketches, so first up I sketched what I thought, keyword here, were the main 3 hairstyles we see RuPaul in. A big gravity-defying updo, a long, almost hairspray kind of look, and a swept to the side do. Then our first classic outfit is something based off a full gown, specifically the All Stars 3 promo look. My main focus from the Pokemon side of this design was capes, or something cape-like, because literally both the first 2 dragon trainers have them, and simplicity because all the early Pokemon designs are. That kind of neck plate thing that I'm not really sure what it's called seemed like an easy place to add a cape from. The texture of the dress seemed easy to translate into dragon scale-like pattern or texture on the dress, and of course that big bouffant hair is one of the iconic RuPaul hairstyles. Next up, we wanted something more battle ready because both Lance and Claire have outfits that look easy to move in, and Claire's already wearing a bodysuit, so this lime green runway look from season 7 fitted the bill pretty well. Especially because I knew I'd be able to transform all that extra flowy fabric into something that's at least cape adjacent. Although worth noting, we took a lot of inspiration from Wallace's design line language here while drafting because of the similar dual arm fabric situation, and obviously all Pokemon fabric isn't drawn as just fabric. The line language is always making a point. And then finally, I knew I wanted something asymmetrical, not only because Rue wears asymmetrical looks quite a lot herself, or looks with something asymmetrical about them, but it's also the main advice she gives for the design challenges, so it must be a favourite of hers. So we found this one-armed asymmetric short dress from the UK promo look, but with this look, instead of stripping stuff away, we actually had to add quite a lot to it to make it more Pokemon. We gave it a little one-shoulder cape like Ryuki's cape to keep the asymmetry, but we gave it a dragon claw like Fascinator, like Transna's accessories, and we swapped the sandals out for boots with added dragon claws to keep the theme going there, but also strappy sandals just aren't very Pokemon. And considering these are our first 3, I'm pretty happy with how all 3 of these turned out. So not knowing which one I wanted to go forward with, I ended up coming to both here and Instagram for feedback, and the general gist was C was the ultimate favourite because it looked more Pokemon, but A was more dragon and RuPaul. And my friend pointed out that we were missing the classic halo hair, so that was my first point of call to change. With success. Much better. Can't believe I didn't include this one originally. Then while the whole boots being a part of the jumpsuit thing is very drag, it's just not very Pokemon. So we added some chunky anklets and matching bangles to help differentiate what starts and stops where. And we obviously changed the line language of the cape to make it more sharp dragon-like language like in A's design. And then we were really lucky in that when you Google RuPaul color palette on a whim just in case something comes up but not really expecting anything to actually happen, an actual decent one comes up. So we adjusted the colours to be more muted because that's how they are in Pokemon designs, and in the end, working backwards from starting with the obvious paid off best. So golden hair bangles and setting for any jewels, because that makes sense. Blue makes the most sense for jewels over the remaining colours. And then most dragon trainers have black as a large part of their outfit, so black jumpsuit makes sense, and then floaty pink fabric to finish off. Fantastic! I am so happy with how this turned out. I will be doing partner Pokemon illustrations of all of these queens at the end and figuring out what their full team is, but first, let's figure out what Plastique and Jinx's designs are. Alright, so I think the easier question to first ask ourselves is what type of Pokemon Plastique would have. I mean, because it's obviously fairy, right? She's so femme and nice and well-mannered, and from there she obviously has to be from Kalos, because it's either got to be Kalos, Alola, Gala or Paldea. And honestly, the region that first had fairy types and is also based off a fashion-forward region is surely the only option. I wanted her pose to be whimsical, but also show off her long nails and have open arms, because like her All-Stars runway package, Asian excellence was going to be the theme, so I needed space to show off the inevitable huge arm pieces. I think she'd probably share the fairy gym there with Valerie, either taking turns to look after it or running it together, so our designs needed to be able to fit alongside hers. As Asian excellence was the main theme, I started off with something based off the final runway for her All-Stars package, but I really had to simplify it for the Pokemon aesthetic. I knew I basically wanted to keep the main focal points of the jutting out hips and the shoulders with that front flap of fabric. Please someone tell me if that has an actual name. And I knew I wanted to keep the shape language and how they were lined, because Valerie has very similar shape language in her outfit. The hair feathers and hairstyle I drew in were really rough, just because I didn't want a headpiece like the original outfit, because that really would have been too much. So I ended up choosing these simple buns and long straight hair that Plastique seems to favour, and we tried it with the back pieces, but again, too much for a Pokemon design. Next up, I had been perusing Plastique's Instagram when I noticed her reunion dress from her original series, and these really chunky tassels caught my interest. The description said they were part of a hat, but the hat wasn't in either of the Instagram pictures of this look, but the name of the traditional outfit was. And I'm not going to try and pronounce it because I will butcher it. And upon looking up this traditional outfit, oh my god, this is flawless. I'm obsessed. The hat by itself is already Pokemon in design, so that was a pretty easy translation, and because we wanted that to be the highlight and focal point of this outfit, we just kept to the flowiness of the traditional dress and merged the hair Plastique was using in the photo shoot, where it's all wrapped up, and how the hair seems to be worn traditionally. This one basically wrote itself. And finally, the outfit that probably screamed most Asian excellence from her runway looks, the Widow Weep Me look. Again, based off another traditional dress, I figured the best thing to do here would be to keep the cuts of the fabric the same, but heavily simplify the patterns on it, and that is exactly what we did. Along with a pretty direct translation of the hair she was wearing. I wasn't particularly happy with my pattern choices from this initial sketch, but I knew that's something I could work on if I went forward with it, which should have been foreshadowing, because a whopping 55% of Instagram and everyone I asked in real life wanted this one. Goodbye, big fancy hat that I wanted to work on. I will remember you. I was obviously categorically wrong in which design I thought was best here. Okay, first things first, ignore how often I try to redo the face here. I should have left it how it was in the first place, but we move. We figured out the overall language of any detail going forward by trying to find tassels in Pokemon designs. But turns out there's not really any, so we ended up choosing Grusha's scarf as our jumping off point. I tried to just line the sleeves like in the actual look a few times, but it just wasn't working. And then I remembered Valerie's and the Furisode girls that work at her gym. So we shortened the sleeves, lined them in that same bubble language like the Furisode girls, but also similar to Grusha's scarf, and went back to this cloud pattern on the original dress to simplify it and place it on our sleeves similarly to Valerie's traditional cloud patterns on hers. This was obviously really successful, so we also lined the main part of the dress to really complete everything. And then colours were initially difficult to figure out, but ultimately, the logic we ended up using is very simple. Like dragon trainers are more prone to capes and have black, all fairy trainers have pink. So with Valerie's pink edging more towards having cooler undertones, like purples and blues, we gave a warmed red undertone to Plastique's and then used the same spacing around the colours as Valerie's colour palette. But obviously we had a different starting point, so we ended up with different colours. And that's how we got our colour palette. I think considering how bland what we started with was, I'm a big fan of how this came out. Still sad about the hat though. And finally, Jinkx. Okay, I forgot to record Jinx's pose here, but it needed to scream tired and in charge. She's very confident and matronly, but she also suffers from narcolepsy. Her typing and region were by far the most difficult to figure out of the three, but we ended up settling on normal typing because Jinx is very musical, considering the main three things she's done out of Drag Race is playing Mama Morton in Chicago on Broadway, Audrey in Little Shop of Horrors off-Broadway, and Maestro, a music-based villain in Doctor Who. And normal types had the most options that I could associate back to music. Then considering the association with Broadway and off-Broadway, I figured the only suitable region was Unova, as the entire region is literally based off New York. Obviously, Unova already has a normal type gym leader in Lenora, but I don't know, they're going to have to be rivals or fight it out or something. Designing Jinx's outfits, I knew my jumping off points were going to be something musical, something witchy, and something old Hollywood. We ended up using the Maestro look from Doctor Who as a pretty direct jumping off point because of A, how much it screams music, but also Jinx does seem to have a love of suits. It needed simplifying though because it is very extra, and I really don't like that hair. So we chose our All Stars roast suit as a combo partner to help dull it down because I don't know why, but when I see that look, it kind of is giving music conductor to me. In the end, we took the lining pattern, the boots, the shirt, and the jacket fasteners from the Maestro outfit, but the bow tie, the hair, and the general suit shape from the roast outfit. Next up, considering how much Jinx talks about being the Supreme from American Horror Story Coven, the amount of witchy outfits is kind of lacking. Weirdly, the outfit I had in the forefront of my brain for doing this one isn't even witchy. Like, I fully thought this tiny hat was a witch's hat in my memory, but it's just not. There is this red witch's outfit from a promotional piece, but I didn't want to directly translate it because it's weirdly too witchy for Pokemon. So I was really trying to ride this line of like, needs to be witch adjacent, but like witchy casual. I tried to incorporate all sorts of stuff into this outfit. I tried the huge rope and tassel from the Light Up All Stars runway, where she was actually like a witch burning, but the actual dress she was wearing in that was more giving wedding dress, so I couldn't use that dress. I tried giving her an umbrella and sunglasses, like the American Horror Story Coven witches, but only ended up keeping the glasses. I tried different lengths of sleeves. It really ended up a whole jumble of things with no specific direction, but it somehow is still giving I could fit into Ghibli's Kiki's delivery service, which is obviously very casual witches. And then finally, the Hollywood look really wrote itself because her All-Stars entrance look is very old Hollywood with the nice addition of being sleepy themed. Honestly, the biggest problem I had translating this was the line language of the hair to suit a Pokemon design. The rest basically wrote itself and came very naturally. I think the only difference we actively made was the tights instead of stockings, because stockings are probably too adult for Pokemon in this context of nightwear specifically. And with that, this is the only outfit I actively chose myself, because as I'm sitting here looking at these three, pondering which outfit I should give a music-based Pokemon gym leader, there really is only one option. This was by far the outfit I made the least amount of changes to going forward. All in all, the boots were really the only trouble I had, and they even changed again for the final illustration after this design edit. Laces aren't very often incorporated into Pokemon shoes, so I had a real issue of how much they should be simplified. And then I couldn't quite wrap my head around the colours they should be because there were too many parts, so I couldn't really do an overall black boot, which for colour theory, a black boot makes the most sense. The hair colour was chosen for us because Jinx is always a redhead, and then conveniently, blue is the contrasting and complementing colour for orange, and the Maestro suit was blue to begin with, so it really wrote itself again. All I had to do was choose what blue exactly. And with our designs done, our gym leaders now need teams. I did originally want to do full drawings of them with their teams, but ultimately I realised this would take up too much time, and this was all taking long enough as it was. So, in relatively quick fashion, I think Rupaul's team would be made up of Dragonair with an Everstone specifically, the only line of dragon types in Kanto, but she wanted to keep the elegance of the Dragonair over the power of Dragonite. Despite being from Kanto, this is going to be our only Gen 1 Pokemon here because of the lack of dragon types in Kanto. I mean, even Lance's team has what, like an Aerodactyl and a Gyarados? Like, some of his team is just vibing with the word dragon, and I figure Rue is a well-travelled gym leader. Considering that she owns franchises all over the world in real life, what's to say she wouldn't own Pokemon from all over? So we've also got Tatsugiri, to quote Giagon, just landed like fresh tilapia, serving fish. Specifically Mega Ampharos, you know Rue would have travelled to Kalos, seen how extra Mega Evolving is, and then seen the hair and jewels on Ampharos once she gains the dragon typing and have needed it immediately. Dracozolt, because we needed a dragon type fossil to go with the Rue is as old as the fossils and dinosaur jokes that make an appearance on every roast and comedy challenge ever, and at least this one is laughing with her. Hydreigon, because it comes with its own panel of judges, hi Michelle, and Altaria. Basically, all of its Pokedex entries are either going on about how it's singing melodies in a crystal clear voice, or about how graceful and calm it is, and it is very rare that we see Rue lose her cool and they can make music together. For Plastique, I tried to keep it generations 1 to 6 with the vibes femme but also fierce. And obviously she's from Kalos, so we're starting off with her Mega Gardevoir. I mean, obviously, fairy type, super femme, the Mega is just chef's kiss. Sylveon evolves from Friendship, which is honestly so sweet. I think it matches Plastique so well. Florges, because it looks like it would read me for filth and I'd be grateful for it. Aromatisse, because look at that leg sticking out of that fluffy skirt. She is serving, destined for the runway. Love it. And Togekiss, because of its dex entries again. To pull a couple, as everyone knows, it visits peaceful regions, bringing them gifts of kindness and sweet blessings. And it shares many blessings with people who respect one another's rights and avoids needless strife. I think both of those really resonate with like how Plastique ends up presenting on the show. And finally, Carbink, because it's literally the Pokemon version of a diamond, born from high temperatures and great pressures underground, and anything gem-based I can't help but feel relates back to drag queens. And for Jinx, like I said, I struggled with these the most, but I think I managed to make them all work musically, bar one, which is Oinkologne. This is our exception to the rule, coming from a generation post-Unova. She would have got it in a trade or something, and obviously not being musical, but Jinx being the pig in the fairy tale court sketch is just such a great reference to have, I couldn't not include it. Then Audino is the hearing Pokemon, but Jinx never travelled to Kalos, so she never got access to its mega form. Chatot is literally a singing bird. Meloetta, like, I know it's a mythical Pokemon and I was trying to stay away from them, but I really don't think we can have a musical team without it, so I'm making an exception. And it was also introduced in black and white, so like, it's literally from the same region. I really don't think there's a scenario here where I can't have this Pokemon. Exploud is literally a speaker, and Snorlax has narcolepsy that can literally only be awoken by music. I'll explain my partner Pokemon choices during our final illustration drawings, but before we start those, I need to come up with a list of rules, because we want them to be able to fit in with the partner Pokemon illustration posters from the Pokemon Center that are always sold out because everybody loves them. So, to make a partner Pokemon illustration in these styles, our rules were main character mostly floating in the middle of the page, the only exceptions for this being Steven, N, and Hiker. I guess maybe because it's hard to have a floaty mask pose, but point being the aim should be floating in space poses. Pokemon placed mostly behind our character with the exception of Piplup because he's tiny so he's behind on the side. Even if it's chunky Pokemon, they need to be 90% fitting in the frame. As much as possible, all of the Pokemon should be in frame and definitely all of our characters. The backgrounds all appear to have a distinct line language based off moves and move types. It seems to be one solid shape that's then layered with the same shape language in different colours that are fairly evenly spaced around the colour wheel at 3 or 4 points. There's always kinds of from confetti or particles that are in the same line language as the background. The soft glows around its background patterns and the particles / confetti. The amount of Pokeballs flying around represent how many are in their team, so as ours is always 6, we'll always need 5 Pokeballs. The line work is actually very sketchy and very fluid in its smoothness and thickness, changing all of the time. The shadows are done with at least 50% opacity brush because they're normally a slightly lighter line between the main colour and the main shadow. The highlights are bright white with a glow added to them. The line work is coloured a darker palette of the objects that the line is associated with, but only where it's highlighted that bright white, along with the line work for the background also being coloured to match whatever colour is closest to. And finally, there's a what I think is a coloured purlin noise put over everything to give us this really distinct muted colours and texture. Oh, and of course I'll be drawing these versions of our gym leaders in my actual Pokemon style and not my style, which mostly changes the face, so only lines for noses, much softer cheekbones, much softer features in general, more simple lashes and squarer shaped ears. Luckily, Rupaul was actually pretty simple to draw in this style. I had a very clear image in my mind for Ru's pose, mostly because it's my go-to floating in space pose, and it exudes confidence as a pose, so it was a good place to start. I chose Dragonair as Rupaul's partner Pokemon because logically it made sense as the only Pokemon from her region. I imagine it was her first Pokemon and she's had it since Dratini. If I was going with vibes alone, I maybe would have picked Altaria, but I just couldn't not pick a Kanto Pokemon for a Kanto gym leader. With Ru falling into place pretty easily, that just left me with the biggest struggle I had, which was where do I want Dragonair facing and what specific S-shape do I want the body to be? The background we did is based off Water Pulse, which is why there's 2 types of blue in there, and honestly, I did cheat with the particles and download a petal brush that looked very similar to water in its line language, and if I'm being honest, I did that with all 3 of these drawings, but I swear, the rest of it, even the damn circles on those Pokeballs, is all just sketched with a really basic brush. Although I would say the Pokeballs have probably been my biggest challenge in all of these portraits. They have to be perfectly round, but I can't use a circle brush or anything because the lines have to be fluid and not consistent in size. I used to use Ibis Paint, and there's a tool on there that kind of creates a circle magnet that you can sketch or draw around, and that would have been ideal for these. But alas, I do not know if there's such a tool in Clip Studio, and I certainly couldn't find it. And here she is, our finished Rupaul partner Pokemon illustration. I'm actually so chuffed with how all 3 of these came out. I really think having the set of rules made before I went into this helped me have a little check-off list so I never felt too lost in what I was trying to achieve. Moving on to Plastique. Hello, Editing Tofu here. So I completely forgot to give my reasons for the choosings of the partner Pokemon for both Plastique and Jinx. So like, real good on me. So for Plastique, I figured her partner Pokemon would be Togekiss, kind of for the same reasons as Dragonair for Rupaul. Even though she's a Kalos gym leader, I've already stated that she's from Johto, so I figured Togekiss would have again been with her since the time in her home region. I think you would expect that as I've already had round 1 of practice and gotten my rules down for these types of drawings that this would have been easier. No, not at all. First of all, those huge sleeves, not easy to work with, considering I have to make sure that they're not covering up all of Togekiss in the background, and I have to make sure they're 90% in shot. In fact, the rule I originally noted was that trainers must be 100% in shot, and only large Pokemon like Metagross may be excused from being 100% in shot. But like, none of the trainers in these posters are working with an outfit like this, so I did give myself a little bit of leeway, providing that I could get Togekiss 100% in shot. The main problem I had was really where to place Togekiss, because a floaty skirt in a floating pose is going to be puffed out and taking up so much space, and same goes for those sleeves. So I was really just trying to find a pose that gave me the most background space to work with. In the end, I realised if I started off with tucking both hands and knees in together and had a directional wind blowing the clothing backwards, this was going to give me the most amount of background space to place Togekiss. And the pose itself looks quite demure, which still suits Plastique's personality quite well, so we did get there in the end. From there, it all came together fairly easily. The face turned out so much nicer in the Pokemon style, and I was able to add the lipstick again. I knew I wanted the detail of the folds in the skirt so the viewer can really get an idea of exactly how that skirt is moving in this freefall kind of pose. The sleeves, again, I had to play around with a little bit because the material that these kind of dresses are typically made out of is normally quite heavy and really wouldn't move in the wind like how I needed them to. So I ended up having to study capes to get that right kind of shape that I needed them. Oh, and then my next big fumble was actually trying to figure out the shape language of this background. Originally, I drew something inspired by the move Fly because of how airy this all is, and of course Togekiss has the flying type, but the straight spiky lines really didn't feel at home amongst all of this round shape language. We tried drawing feathers and clouds, and then I thought maybe I could take the shape language from a feather or cloud brush and simplify it, but honestly none of it was working for me, so this feels like cheating. But instead we had to settle for finding a cloud brush, making it more solid because the cloud brush was textured, drawing an automatic line around it, and then working on it in the same way that we would have done in the previous piece. I know that obviously having all these brushes is kind of the bonus you get for doing digital artwork, and I obviously do use it, but I still feel guilty every time I do that. I wasn't even happy with the colours I originally chose for the layering, and I had to edit them with the hue slide afterwards. I think they worked great by themselves, just not with the colour palette of Plastique alongside. So the background we ended up with, I feel could either be interpreted as either clouds or trees. Plus add in the fairy typing and the Johto heritage and cherry blossom leaves with the obvious cherry on the cake particle brush for this illustration. I think this ended up being one of my favourite trainers, but my least favourite background. And finally, Jinx. Hello, Editing Tofu again. So, Jinx's partner Pokemon is a bit of an odd choice. So my instinct was to place her with Chatot or Meloetta because those are the most directly musical of her Pokemon. But both of those have been used as partner Pokemon in the Project Voltage illustrations with Hatsune Miku recently, and I felt like Jinx would want to be individual in her choices. So because she really knows how to belt out a song, I've gone with Exploud, which was certainly an interesting Pokemon to work with. Okay, I know I said I had a hard time figuring out Plastique's placement in her illustration, but working with the big chunk that is Exploud certainly had its own challenges. On one side, I did originally try for a slightly floaty pose, but ultimately decided I wanted Jinx to have a more powerful pose that was grounded, similar to the Steven illustration, because I thought that would lend itself better to being in frame with an Exploud who is inevitably going to be presenting quite angry, and floating whimsical human next to it just doesn't quite fit. I let myself not be too worried about keeping him 100% in frame for starters, and I thought I had come up with a pose that I was really happy with, until I tried to make that pose work alongside the Jinx pose I was already happy with. I really tried to make it work, but ultimately there was no combination where both of them could shine, and I had to drop it and do the sensible thing that I should have done in the first place and do the rough sketch with Jinx still in the frame. On the bright side, I did manage to figure out what I was doing with those boots during all of this. I realized that Gloria actually does have boots with laces, so I basically just ended up extending that for longer boots, and honestly, these look so much better straight away. And working with just a much less convoluted design made the colours fall into place so much easier. The lighter colour of that boot had been really bothering me, so I was so chuffed to make it a predominantly black boot work. Honestly, the biggest whoopsie I had in this design was the light direction. In all the partner Pokemon illustrations, they have a really strong sense of light direction, but I honestly got so caught up in the drawing of this and ended up in a trance that I forgot which light direction I was doing halfway through and kind of accidentally ended up with two, so my bad, but I still think it looks great. The background is actually the one that came out the easiest because I kind of used the line language of both Hyper Voice and Boom Burst, which kind of evokes the imagery of how like air and wind would move if the move is used. Does that make sense? Like when you have a fire or a water type move, it's obviously fire or water, but with voice type moves, you're just kind of drawing how the air around them is moving because the voice itself has no visual. And how air moves in Pokemon is drawn pretty consistently, so that basically sorted itself out. And then we chose the confetti particle brush because to show off like the air movement again. And this is them all done. What do you guys think? Do you think they fit together with the partner Pokemon illustrations? I think they look quite well as a set together, but I haven't actually placed them next to the partner Pokemon illustrations, and I'm a bit scared too. I'll leave that to your guys' feedback. I'd love to hear your feedback on what I can improve on these going forward, and obviously, as previously stated, please let me know if you want to see more of the series by telling me what drag queens or what franchises you'd like to see next. But that's it for now. Keep an eye on the YouTube posts as I'll probably be putting up a vote shortly on what video do you guys want to see next. I had been hoping to get this out before the new year, but here we are, first video of 2025. So thank you so much for the support last year, and thank you so much for your continued support this year. I will see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone. Bye.